I worked at Walmart for over 3 years. I never really believed in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but what happened to me one cold night completely changed my perspective. It was late, around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when I found myself working alone in the back of the store. It was a quiet night, the kind where the parking lot is nearly empty, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzz in a steady hum that's just loud enough to drive you a little crazy. My name is Mike, and I worked as a stock clerk. I was used to the late shifts. In fact, I liked them. No customers around, no distractions, just me and the shelves. But that night, things felt different. From the very beginning, I had a sense that something was off. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was just the overwhelming stillness of the store, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 2 a.m., I got the usual call from my manager, Charlie. He told me that the store had experienced a break-in a few weeks back, and that security had been having problems ever since. He asked me to check the cameras in the electronics aisle just to make sure everything was in order. I didn't think much of it. It was routine stuff. When I got to the electronics section, I noticed something strange. The TV screens were all turned off, even though they're usually left on, showing random promotions. And then, I heard a soft whisper, almost like someone was standing right behind me. "Mike, come here." I froze, but there was no one there. It sounded like it came from the speakers overhead, but the voice didn't match any of the usual announcements. It sounded almost like a woman's voice, distant and urgent. I turned around quickly, expecting to see a prankster or some kid messing around, but there was nothing. Just rows of televisions casting dark reflections on the polished tile floor. I shook it off, thinking I was just tired. But then, something else caught my eye. A figure, dressed in black, standing at the far end of the aisle. I thought it was another employee at first, but I quickly realized no one else was scheduled to work that late. The figure didn't move, just stood still, facing the rows of TVs. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed in the emptiness. No response. I walked toward the figure cautiously, my heart racing in my chest. The closer I got, the more I felt this heavy, suffocating presence. When I was just a few feet away, the figure turned its head slowly, and I saw its face, pale with hollow eyes, and its skin stretched tight over its bones like something not entirely human. I staggered backward, stumbling over a display case. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The figure didn't move, but the feeling of dread intensified, like the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, leaving only an empty aisle and the low hum of the lights. I stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what I just saw. I called Charlie back, my hands shaking, but when he answered, he sounded different. He told me that the store had been abandoned a long time ago, and that the new management had tried to cover up the strange incidents that had happened there. Something about a history of disappearances. But Charlie, he had left for good a few months before. I never heard from him again. The next morning, I went to work and found the security footage from that night had been erased. Nothing was left. Even the cameras in the aisle where I saw the figure had been tampered with. I still work at Walmart, but I'll never forget what happened that night. The feeling of being watched, the cold air, the woman's voice. Sometimes when I walk down those same aisles, I still feel it. Like something's waiting for me, just around the corner. But it's not human. I know that much. And the worst part? I'm not sure if I ever really left that night. I couldn't shake what had happened. That night haunted me. Every time I walked through the store, I felt the pressure, the weight of eyes watching me. But I tried to push it all to the back of my mind. I needed the job, and besides, the store was busy as usual, with people coming in and out, stocking shelves and moving products. It seemed like a normal day, but it wasn't. One night, about a week after the incident in the electronics aisle, I was assigned to the back of the store again. It was another graveyard shift, just like the last. I tried to keep my focus, stacking boxes and organizing items, but every few minutes, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, checking the empty aisles, expecting to see something, anything, that would remind me of that cold, hollow figure. Around 2 a.m., I heard the distinct click of the store's overhead speakers crackling on. I assumed it was just a malfunction, the kind that happened all the time in a place like Walmart. But then, I heard the same voice from before. This time, it was clearer, closer, almost a whisper in my ear. "Mike, you shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. I spun around, looking for anything that could explain this, but the aisles were empty. I was alone in the back. The voice, it sounded real, too real. And it felt like it came from within my mind, like it was speaking to me directly. My heart started to race. I grabbed my phone to check the security cameras again, but the app on my phone wouldn't load. It just kept freezing. Every time I tried to call someone, the phone would glitch out. Panic set in. I started walking toward the front of the store, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank on me, or that I was just losing it from the long hours. But as I passed the aisle near the frozen foods, I noticed something strange. The air around me felt colder, like a sudden drop in temperature, right in the middle of the store. It wasn't normal, especially since the air conditioning was always on full blast at that time of night, but it felt unnaturally cold, like a freezer had burst open in the middle of the store. I kept walking, but something caught my eye. At the far end of the aisle stood a figure. No, it wasn't a person. It was more like a shadow, like a darkness that clung to the corners of the shelves, stretching across the floor. It was the same feeling I had when I first saw that figure in the electronics section. Only this time it felt stronger, like it was waiting for me, watching. I froze. My legs felt like they were made of stone. But then, the lights in the aisle flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, the shadow moved. It slithered across the floor, faster than anything human could move. It was like it didn't follow the rules of physics, like it could bend the light around it. I backed away slowly, my chest tightening as I stumbled toward the employee exit. But as I turned, I noticed the door was shut. I knew I hadn't locked it, and the automatic exit door should have been open. But now it was sealed shut. My mind was racing. I was trapped. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw it again. The shadow was moving closer. I could feel it, could sense its presence behind me. The whispering voice was louder now, almost screaming, "Get out, before it's too late." I bolted toward the back storage room, my breath ragged and shallow. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I stood there for what felt like hours, barely daring to breathe. I didn't want to look out, didn't want to see what was waiting for me, but I knew it was there. I felt it. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again. The same voice, but this time it wasn't warning me. It was laughing, a low, guttural sound that chilled me to my core. I gathered the courage to step toward the security room. I needed to check the cameras. I had to see if there was anything that could explain this. But when I logged into the system, every single camera feed was static. No images, no video, just a blank screen. And then I saw it. On the monitor. A message, written in bold letters across the screen. "Leave. Now." Before I could react, the power flickered, and everything went dark. I was alone in the pitch-black store. Except I wasn't. From the darkness, I heard it again. Asterisk the whisper star. This time, it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, my pulse thundering in my ears. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me. But there, in the corner of the room, stood the same figure. Asterisk the shadow star. It was solid, yet not entirely real, like a black stain that had no right to exist in the light of day. I couldn't move. My legs felt frozen, my chest so tight I thought I might suffocate. The figure didn't speak. It just stood there, unmoving, its presence suffocating. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it moved, slowly, deliberately, like it was savoring my fear. Every step it took felt like an eternity, each one sending ripples of dread through my body. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It was like my body had betrayed me, locking me in place. I felt the temperature drop even further, the air growing thick and heavy. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, deafening in the silence. The figure took another step forward, and then I saw it, the faint outline of something in its hand. It wasn't a weapon, at least not in the way you'd think. It looked more like a tangle of broken wires, twisted and bent, like some kind of tool. It wasn't just the darkness of the figure that terrified me, but the sheer wrongness of it. Everything about it felt unnatural. It was as if this thing didn't belong in the world of the living. Without thinking, my instincts kicked in. I bolted. I don't remember much of what happened next, only flashes of chaos. I ran through the aisles, my breath ragged, knocking over displays, my shoes squeaking against the waxy floor. I could hear it behind me, moving with an unnatural speed, almost like it was floating just above the ground. The air was suffocating, and I could feel the icy cold creeping closer. I didn't dare look back. The shadows felt like they were closing in on me from every direction. I reached the employee exit, yanking on the door, but it wouldn't open. I screamed, banging on the glass, but it was useless. The door was sealed shut, just like before. I was trapped. Then I heard the voice again. It was no longer a whisper. It was a harsh, distorted growl, cutting through the air like a knife. Asterisk, you can't escape. Asterisk, panic surged through me. I had to get out. I had to survive. I ran back toward the security room, hoping maybe there was some way to call for help. But when I turned the corner, I froze. There, in front of me, was the same figure standing at the end of the hallway. It wasn't even moving now, just watching me with those dark, empty eyes. It seemed to stretch across the hallway, blocking my only escape. I backed away, trembling, my mind racing. I needed to think, to do something, anything. And then, in a burst of desperation, I turned around and bolted toward the stockroom, hoping there was another way out. My heart was hammering in my chest, and every instinct screamed for me to run, to hide, to do anything to get away. The stockroom was my only hope. It was a cramped space filled with shelves of products, but at least there, I felt like I could lose myself, make it harder for whatever this thing was to find me. I ducked behind one of the shelves and crouched low, my breathing heavy and ragged. I could hear it now, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. The air was so cold I could see my breath in front of me, misting up in the dim light. And then, just as I thought I might be able to hide, I heard the faintest sound. A scraping noise, like nails against metal. I looked up, and in the shadow of the shelf above me, I saw it. It was crawling along the walls, moving like a spider, its twisted form bending at unnatural angles. It was closer now. I could hear its breath, ragged and wet, like something that shouldn't have lungs. I had no choice. I had to move. I grabbed a nearby box, lifting it as quietly as I could, and I threw it in the opposite direction. The sound of it crashing to the floor echoed through the room. The shadow hissed, its head snapping toward the noise. In that moment, I sprinted toward the exit again, my legs burning with adrenaline. This time, the door opened. I don't know how or why. Maybe it was my sheer desperation, or maybe something else. But the door gave way, and I didn't hesitate. I ran into the parking lot, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. I didn't stop. I kept running, not looking back. I could still feel its presence behind me, but I didn't care. I just had to get out of there. When I reached my car, I threw myself inside, locking the doors, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I drove as fast as I could, not stopping until I was miles away from that Walmart, from whatever that thing was. I never went back to that store, and I never will. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the voice, the whisper, the growl, and I know that it's still out there, waiting, watching. And the worst part? I'm not sure if I'll ever be truly free. I thought I could escape. I really did. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more that voice, that thing, crept into my life again. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It was in my waking moments. It followed me, attached itself to me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. It started with little things, sounds in the night, a faint scraping noise, like nails against metal, echoing through the silence of my apartment. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, only to find that nothing was there. But the feeling, it stayed. The pressure, the unease. I began to wonder if it had followed me home, and for the first time I seriously considered the idea that maybe, just maybe, what I had seen wasn't a trick of the mind. I tried to convince myself that it was just stress, that I was overreacting. But it wasn't just the noises. The shadows in my apartment grew deeper, darker, as if something was watching me from the corners. Sometimes, I'd glance at the reflection in the windows or the mirrors and catch a glimpse of something that didn't belong. A figure, a face, or worse, a shadow moving when no one else was there. One evening, I found myself sitting on the couch, trying to watch a movie to take my mind off things. It was late, just past midnight. The apartment was quiet, the only sound coming from the TV. But then, the silence in the room deepened, and that familiar, cold feeling washed over me again. The air was different, almost thick, too thick to breathe. I looked around the room, my gaze darting from one corner to the other, searching for any sign of movement. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window behind me, standing just beyond my shoulder, was the same shadow I had seen at Walmart. It was there, tall, dark, and unmoving. I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. I whipped around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. Nothing. I was alone, but I knew I wasn't. I could feel it. I stood up, shaking, and grabbed my phone. My fingers were clumsy, but I managed to dial the number. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, to ground myself in reality. Charlie. He was the only one who had been there the night I saw the figure. He was the only one who knew something weird was going on, even if he'd never said it outright. I knew he was long gone from the store, but he might still have some answers. The phone rang once, twice. Then I heard the click of him picking up. Mike! His voice was hoarse, almost surprised. I didn't think you'd ever call again. I barely got the words out. Charlie, I think it's back. It's following me. It's in my apartment. There was a long pause on the other end. And then, I heard something strange in Charlie's voice. Something that made my stomach churn. Asterisk, you shouldn't have called me. Asterisk. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The way he said it, it wasn't like him. There was something off about it. A sharp edge to his tone, almost like he knew more than he should. Charlie, I whispered. What's going on? Please, what the hell is happening? He didn't respond right away. But when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost afraid. You have to listen to me, Mike. Get out of that apartment. Now. Before I could say anything else, the call abruptly cut off. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in the same nightmare that had haunted me at Walmart. I glanced over my shoulder, back to the reflection in the window, but this time, I saw something different. In the glass, the figure wasn't just standing there. It was moving, slowly, reaching out towards me with long, spindly fingers that seemed to stretch beyond what was possible. The same cold, twisted face appeared in the reflection, grinning. It was too much. I had to leave. I grabbed my keys, rushed out of the apartment, and didn't stop running until I was outside. My car was parked a few blocks away. I didn't even care that it was late. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I needed to be far away from whatever was hunting me. But even as I started driving, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was right behind me. The whispering, the growl, the cold, suffocating presence. I drove aimlessly for hours, not knowing where I was going or where I could hide. Eventually, I found myself on a deserted road, the headlights of my car slicing through the darkness like a knife. And then, in the distance, I saw something strange, something out of place. A Walmart. Couldn't be. I pulled over, my mind racing. This had to be a trick. The store had been closed for weeks. Everyone had left. But there it was, standing tall in the darkness, as though it had never closed. The lights were on, flickering in the windows, and just outside the entrance, I could see something moving. A shadow, a figure, And then I realized, with a jolt of horror, that it wasn't just a figure I was seeing. It was the same shadow, the same presence that had followed me. It was waiting for me. I never thought I'd return to that place. But now it seemed like I had no choice. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop until I faced it again. I was already walking toward the door before I even realized it. I don't know what compelled me to step out of the car and walk toward the Walmart. It was like I was in a trance, unable to stop myself. The air was unnaturally still, and the silence was almost deafening as I moved closer to the front entrance. The parking lot was empty, but the store lights flickered sporadically, as though struggling to stay on. There was no sound from inside, no hint of life, but something felt wrong. Something darker. As I reached the front doors, I saw them, standing there just beyond the glass. Rows of dark silhouettes, almost human, their outlines obscured by the dim lighting. My heart skipped a beat. I knew they weren't employees. They weren't people. They were shadows. I hesitated, staring through the glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figures didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, but there was a heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe. It felt like I was being pulled in, like the store was drawing me back into its clutches. The automatic doors didn't open. Instead, I reached for the handle, and it gave way easily as though the store had been waiting for me. The instant I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The coldness I had felt back at my apartment, the same suffocating chill, filled the space, and I felt it settle deep into my bones. I stood in the vestibule for a moment, frozen, unsure of what to do. The store was eerily quiet, the shelves lined with goods but untouched. It was like everything had been abandoned mid-shift. I could feel something watching me, waiting star. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper, like a breath across my ear. A voice, soft and distorted, just like before. "Mike, you're too late." I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing. The aisles were empty. I could see the security cameras, their red lights blinking in the distance, but none of them were working. It was as if the entire place had been frozen in time, locked in a state of suspended animation. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be here, but I also knew there was no escaping. That thing, that shadow, was here, and if I didn't face it now, I would never be free. I moved slowly down one of the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I passed the rows of empty shelves, I caught a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. A figure. Not the shadow, but something else. Something more human, but distorted, like a person whose body had been stretched and contorted. I froze again. The figure was staring directly at me, its eyes wide and hollow, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. It didn't move, but I could feel the malice radiating off of it. A dark, suffocating presence that made my stomach turn. I stumbled back, but when I looked around, I realized I had lost track of the aisle. The layout of the store had changed. The shelves were different now, twisted and disorganized, as if they had shifted in impossible ways. Nothing made sense anymore. It felt like I was walking through a nightmare, the space around me warping, closing in. I could hear the voice again, louder now, closer. The growl, mixed with a low, guttural laugh that seemed to vibrate through my skull. "You can't leave. You can never leave." My breathing quickened as I stumbled forward, trying to find my way out. The shadow had to be close now, and I couldn't escape it. I had to face it, or else I would be trapped here forever. The store had become this thing. The figure was part of it. And whatever it wanted from me, it wasn't going to stop until it got it. I reached the back of the store where the old and used stockroom was. The doors were open. I knew I had to go in, but something in the back of my mind told me that was exactly what it wanted. I had no choice. I stepped inside. The stockroom was even colder than the rest of the store, the air thick and suffocating. And then, just like before, I saw it. Standing at the far end of the room, the dark figure. Its body was larger now, its features sharper, its twisted grin wide and gleaming with a malevolent hunger. "Mike!" it whispered, the sound wrapping around me like a vice. "You've been chosen." I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Couldn't breathe. It was like the walls of the stockroom were closing in, the space shrinking around me. "You can't fight it, Mike," it said, its voice no longer distorted, but clear. "You were always meant to be here." The shadow moved toward me, the air around it rippling with a coldness I couldn't escape. I backed up, but the walls pressed against me, trapping me. I could feel the shadow's presence seeping into my skin, its touch cold and electric, sending chills down my spine. It was then that I understood. This wasn't just something haunting me. It was the store, the very place I had worked at, the place that had changed me, that had turned my life upside down. This thing, whatever it was, had claimed the store. It had claimed me, and now I was a part of it. The last thing I remember is the sound of the door slamming shut behind me, sealing me inside. I felt the pressure, the weight of it suffocating me. And in that moment, I knew I was never going to leave Walmart again. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room was dark, but not the familiar darkness of my apartment. It was a suffocating blackness, the kind that presses in on you, making it hard to breathe. My hands were clammy, my body cold to the touch, like I hadn't moved in hours. I tried to sit up, but my muscles felt stiff, like they hadn't been used in years. Panic flooded me. What happened? The last thing I remembered. The shadow. The voice. Walmart. I blinked, trying to focus, but nothing made sense. The walls around me were bare, the floor a cold concrete slab. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered sporadically, buzzing in the same way they had at the store. The room felt familiar, but wrong, like it was something I should have recognized. It was then that I realized it was the stockroom, but it couldn't be. The stockroom had been sealed. I had escaped. I jumped to my feet, my legs trembling, but as soon as I turned around, I froze. The door to the stockroom was wide open, the same door I had entered through when I tried to escape. Beyond it was the same endless row of shelves, stacked high with products. It was like a never-ending labyrinth, twisting and bending in impossible ways. The store. I wasn't out. I wasn't free. I rushed toward the door, but as I stepped into the hallway, something stopped me. Something impossible. The walls around me began to close in, shifting and contorting as though the store itself were alive. The shelves weren't just shelves anymore. They were like the limbs of some monstrous creature, bending and twisting, reaching for me. The very air was heavy with the stench of rot, and the lights flickered once more, casting long, crawling shadows along the floor. It was the shadow. It was here. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out, but I couldn't move. I was trapped again, trapped in this nightmare. The figure appeared, not as a shadow, but as something more tangible now. His body was huge, its limbs long and disproportionate. The same cold grin stretched across its face, its eyes hollow and dark. "You can't escape," it hissed. The voice was louder now, more familiar, like it had always been inside my head, echoing in the deepest corners of my mind. "You are part of me now." I tried to scream, to run, but it was as if the store had taken control of me. Every step I took led me back to the same place, the stockroom, the aisles, the front door. No matter what I did, I couldn't get out. The walls shifted to trap me, the shelves closing in like claws. The lights flickered again, and I heard the whisper, the growl, that haunting, suffocating voice. "Mike, you're one of us now." I collapsed to the floor, my hands trembling as I tried to cover my ears, trying to block out the voice. But it wouldn't stop. It was inside me, crawling beneath my skin, filling my mind, twisting everything I had ever known into something dark and monstrous. I looked up one last time, and there it was, standing above me, the shadow. But it wasn't just a figure anymore. It was the store. It was the walls. It was the lights, the shelves, the very air around me. It was everything. And then, just as the darkness closed in completely, the last thought I had before I lost myself to it was this: there was never any escape. I am Walmart now.